Hello friends out there in YouTube land, Robert Ham here with Robert Ham Photography, and I'm going over the TL70 again. I'm going to give you something a little bit different. Right now I'm using the front-facing camera of my cell phone and the cell phone audio just to try to bring you some information about the TL70. So if it looks a little different to you, sorry. Okay, so as we walk through the house here, I want you to notice in this room right here behind me, look at all the light that's coming in from the windows. There's so much light coming in from the windows that it takes a moment for the camera to actually adjust. In a room like this, I'm using, with the TL70, f5.6, and I'll use negative exposure compensation because of all of that light, and I'll get a nice exposure. Now, if that fan is on that you see up there, that will introduce non-daylight balanced light. That will introduce a very orange light, which will throw the color cast of the Instax film off when using this camera. That's not a fault of the camera. The camera didn't fail you anyhow. That is the daylight balanced properties of Instax film. Now let's look as we continue. Notice here as I come into this room, look how much darker this room is. We still have some window light, but the light's different. The light's also coming in from one side to another. So here, this is an environment that if I was shooting with this wall in the background, with the light that's coming in from the window that you can see in my reflection, I'd probably use f5.6 real easily with negative exposure compensation. However, if I was coming to photograph in this particular spot, and let me just zoom this in for you real quick. If I was photographing here, look how much darker the center image is. The camera's actually having a hard time metering. If I was, and the camera for the cell phone that is, if I was shooting in this environment, I would definitely be using f5.6 with positive exposure compensation, meaning it's going to take a much longer exposure. Let's just keep going on through here. What we're noticing is that inside the house, like this, we definitely need to be using f5.6. We're going to be assured really excellent images as long as the lights are off. We notice that the ceiling's nice and bright, and white is a titanium white. It's reflecting a lot of light. It's going to make this easy. Also notice that it's so dark inside compared to the outside that the film looks a little grainy. Now watch what happens when we step outside. Alright, we are now in the grand outdoors, okay? There's so much light here. The film on the camera that you're seeing is no longer grainy, but the sky up above is totally washed out. Look at that, it's all white. It's only when the camera begins to zoom in up there and actually try to meter for it that we still see some of the less blown out parts. This is telling us something very important about the film, and that is that when we use Instax out here, we're going to need to do something. If we're out here, notice there are no bright spots on my face. In fact, if we turn this way, I'm in the shade of a tree. You can see a starburst coming from around that tree, but that tree right there is shading me. Guess what? F8. Negative exposure compensation is a great starting point right here. But as we continue, look at the hot spots over here. Look at the hot spots on my face between the shadows and everything. If you start moving out into this area, you cannot be at f8 with negative exposure compensation. You need to be more like at f16 or f22. In fact, this scene out here has some dark darks to bright highlights. If we were to take a light meter right now, we would find that the highlights right here that you see in this area are bright at about a 17 exposure values, and 17 is the number if you rate everything exposure values. We would find that the darks that you see back here behind me are somewhere around a 5 or a 4, going into a 5. That means we've got 11 total stops of tonal range right there, just between those. And that's important because remember, Instax Film, it only has about 10 stops of EV. So what do? You don't shoot in those areas. You stay away from the hot spots. You open up to f8, and you then use negative exposure compensation. Notice over here, I'm out, it's a bright day, I can get a nice exposure, but I don't have to have anything totally blown out. In this little shaded spot right here where I don't have direct light hitting me and I'm all soft, it's a great place to be. But just turning around and walking this way, just by a moment, can get me into that big hot patch of sunlight right over here. And once I do, your exposure is going to be totally blown. Now remember, the TL70 is metering for the shadows on a total matrix meter. So when we're right here, we've got some mixed shadow environment. It's going to try to meter so that the shadows over here, the darkest part in the scene, come out to be properly exposed. That's going to make the lightest part in the scene totally blow out. In fact, it's going to blow out all the highlights. So you see the tips of the leaves, you see the blue and the white in my shirt, it's going to blow all those out, and all you're going to be left are the contrast lines. So what have we learned? What have we talked about? This is it right here. When we're outside, we want to stay away from direct sunlight. Staying away from direct sunlight is going to give you the ability to use the beautiful, bright, wide open lens that the TL70 offers. And our starting point in the shade like this is going to be at f8 with minus exposure compensation. If we do decide to go over there and photograph in any of those hot spots in a mixed shade environment like you see back there, all those hot spots, then we know that we're going to need to be at f16, possibly f22 with negative exposure compensation. And what did we find out about inside? Well, we found out that inside, when we photograph, we need to make sure that we're aware of the light changes that happens just because of windows in a room. More windows, reflection, even in the same room when facing a different way, you're going to have different light hitting it. So what do we do inside? The inside baseline is f5.6, and depending on whether or not the room is being lit by quite a bit of window light or whether the room is in shade in that particular area is whether they're going to use negative exposure compensation or positive exposure compensation. Guys, if you take these tips into account when shooting with the TL70 and you read light like what's happening right now, you'll have much better results on every single picture that you take. These simple tips, starting at f8 with negative exposure compensation in the shade, using f22 or f16 with negative exposure compensation in mixed light and consistent light, and inside starting at f5.6 will help you get the best out of your TL70 photography. Guys, I'm Robert Ham with roberthamphotography.com. You can catch me over on Twitter at robhamphoto. In fact, that's where you're going to get the whole story. So if you're watching here only, go subscribe over there. I'll catch you on the flip side. I want to thank you for watching. Guess I should get in my car now.